I want to bring in Sam Vadas, Schwab Network contributor, to help set up the action today. Sam, all right, so let's talk a little bit about tariffs first. Tariffs top of mind, but not causing damage as it relates to the market. I mean, it's
especially when you look at tech.
Yes.
I mean, certainly looking past some of the tariff uncertainty. But as you mentioned in those headlines, Diane, obviously Brazil is now very much in focus at 50%, which is actually on the higher end when you look at countries across the board with regards to some of their rates, which is very different to the 10% that they were initially talking about. And as you also mentioned in those headlines, what's really interesting about Brazil too is that this seems to be having a bit of a political angle here. You know, when we look at the reasons behind why Trump has actually slapped tariffs on a lot of these countries, obviously it's been over the deficits. Now they actually have a surplus with Brazil, which is an interesting part of the story as well. Obviously we've seen some of the reasons around fentanyl with regards to China, but this obviously is around, as you mentioned, to do with the prosecution of Bolsonaro. So that is obviously a really important part of the story too. Brazil has said it will respond with reciprocity, so we're obviously going to be watching to see what happens there. But you know, an interesting part of the story as well, I was listening to a conversation this morning, and something that I've been looking at very closely over the years, particularly when it comes to US dollar dominance too, is that will this bring Brazil closer to China? I mean, you know, that's a big question that obviously, you know, the markets will look at the future. In the future, obviously, we're trying to figure out what this tariff rate will mean for the trade relationship here. But, you know, it's an interesting part of the story as well, because we know that China has been investing heavily in places like Brazil, and obviously they are subject to tariffs as well. So obviously we saw the start of the week kicking off with a lot of the tariffs focused on Southeast Asia. And, you know, the big question is, you know, how much trade actually happens between Laos and Cambodia? This obviously has been seen as a way to plug loopholes where China might be actually manufacturing some of their stuff to get to the US as sort of a circumvention. So
the transnational shipping.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, whether this is part of that narrative too is a big question.
Yeah, and it's so, to be fair, I think we had some indications, not as draconian as they are, when the president called out BRICS at the beginning of this week, right? That, you know, there might be some pressure as it relates to Brazil. And so, but the extent of it feels, you know, just more extreme. And also the politicization of it, given that the way the tariff kicked off and the executive order that was used to start approaching this was about the trade imbalance, not about politics. So this takes a very different kind of approach, and it begs the question, can it occur?
That's
you know, and that's still unclear.
And I think we'll have to see that come out in the wash as far as, you know, that Section 301.
Yeah, exactly.
What they're using to justify why they're putting these levies on some of these countries.
And then, of course, copper is still in focus, because the question around copper was, do we have a date for when these tariffs are coming? Like, you know, Trump says we're going to levy tariffs on copper imports. Those are going to be massive as well. Thank you very much for your attention to this matter, to borrow a term from
He's got our attention. We talk about it every day.
Yes, absolutely. So, you know, now we have the date. August 1st, less than a month away.
You know, August 1st is shaping up to be a very busy day, isn't it? And no doubt for some of those customs officers as well. They're looking forward to that day. But, you know, we've seen prices rise once again off the back of now this confirmed date of August 1st, because we didn't really know when these tariffs, if you're talking 50%, will be coming into effect. So this is building on the rally as far as those copper prices are concerned. Interesting when you look at sort of internationally over at the LME, for instance, the London Metals Exchange, a widening gap between the prices in the US and international markets, which goes to show the sort of premium you're sort of paying here in the US. But it doesn't change the fact that the US doesn't have the capacity for self-reliance as far as the analysts are talking about. You know, when we talk about having to build up some of that production, that capacity, I mean, it's going to take a while. And I think, you know, some of the dates I've seen floating around has been sort of 2027, 2028. So what does that mean in the meantime? Well supplied for now. That's at least what the market seems to think. And then obviously we've seen some of those miners that have been up off the back of that with regards to the narrative that this will be good for the domestic producers. They'll very much benefit from the America First onshoring story as well. But I also see that obviously a country that I follow very, very closely is China stimulus. It looks like off the back of some more evidence of their deflationary pressures, that we could see some more support coming down the pike, and that seems to be helping out the broader commodity space, actually.
Yeah.
Because, you know, when you think about China obviously being a big customer of a lot of those commodities, and, you know, a lot of demand obviously for stuff that copper goes into, but also iron ore. So we're obviously seeing that helping things on the commodity space too.
We got to talk tech. Nvidia, right? I mean, come on. I know I sound like Dan Ives here.
Yeah,
He goes, come on, it's happening. I mean, he called this. He said it was going to hit $4 trillion.
Yeah.
He's right. I literally just got another note from Dan in my inbox just now. Dan Ives of Wedbush. You know him. You get his notes as well, calling out. He says Microsoft is going to be next. But before we can't move on to Microsoft without acknowledging this big move by Nvidia, that $4 trillion.
And I have to use this opportunity to correct myself when I said yesterday that they've joined the $4 trillion club. I mean, it's a club of one.
Yes.
I mean, that's still going to be a club, I suppose.
Yes.
But let's see who else joins the club, according to Dan Ives, as you mentioned. But yeah, I mean, making history, and just such a stunning run, I suppose, because, you know, I remember sitting in Asia at the beginning of the year and everyone was so rattled by DeepSeek.
Yes.
And, you know, that was putting into question the whole CapEx narrative as well. So now we've obviously seen Goldman Sachs, a buy rating 185, price target citing strong growth potential. I mean, obviously, that's what's got it to this point. You know, I was listening to also a fascinating conversation as well this morning about the fact that companies right now who are using Nvidia chips are not willing to sort of take the chance on other hardware because they are wanting to stick with what is proven to work.
Yeah.
So the other part of this story, obviously, is Nvidia's adaptability. I mean, you and I were speaking about this over the last week or so as well. I mean, how they've managed to obviously circumvent some of those export controls with continuing to come out with China-specific chips because, of course, the importance of that market to a company like Nvidia and the fact that they have had to adapt to obviously maintain that market share. But, you know, obviously they have a bit of a challenge in China where, you know, Huawei is obviously giving Nvidia a little bit of a run for their money too. But the Chinese still want to get their hands on these Nvidia chips.
They do. And they, you know, again, they had a workaround previously. We'll see what it looks like in the future.
Yeah.
Sam, thank you so much for that.
Can I leave you with a Kenny Pulkari tidbit?
Go right ahead.
Come on, we have to mention this. Nvidia is now worth more than every public traded company in Germany.
Oh, wow. That's so Kenny. Kenny, I know, I love his notes because he always finishes off with a recipe as well. And he goes that you can say thank you to Nvidia, which rallied hard, as we know. Thank you. Our thanks to Sam Vadas, Schwab Network contributor, for the deep dive into tariffs and tech.